So first of all, welcome Dr. Arredondo for agreeing to be our mentor for both this Saturday and next Saturday. And so we're gonna get us started. This is the first session of the mentorship series. So just as a gentle reminder, we will be recording this event for educational purpose, and we're gonna post it both on our website and on YouTube later. So students who don't have the time to join us right now can watch the video later. So if you don't feel comfortable being seen on the video or ask questions directly, you can type it up in the chat box, and me and both Dr. Arredondo can access to those questions and answer later. You're welcome to mute yourself if there is background noise, but you're welcome to unmute yourself to speak up if you want to. And the format of our mentorship session we're going to have the first session, which is today, where our mentor will mostly present on the topic that they prepared for. And the second session, which will be next Saturday, we will do more of a Q&A and build some connection between the mentees and the mentor. Yeah. So,
okay.
Welcome, Dr. Arredondo.
Well, thank you, Yue.
Welcome.
And I'm happy to join you and our other guests on the phone. And it's a beautiful Saturday here in Phoenix, Arizona. It's kind of warm. It's comfortable warm. It's not hot yet. So, I think you had the bio already on the, it's been posted, so we don't have to go through that. I am very happy to talk about this in particular topic, navigating diversity. And I think I want to talk about it in terms of navigating diversity in predominantly white institutions, which is where most of us find ourselves. And that is something that can be challenging across differences. So I'm going to start with just a few premises about this talk and about navigating diversity. And at the end, perhaps I can share it with Ray, and she can post it, or we can do something with this because it's written. What I always say with my premises is that diversity is a fact of life, and that diversity is present in all organizations and institutions and even families. So we may say, well, you know, we're all the same heritage in our family, but within that family, there are different dimensions of diversity. And we can look at that as a reference point. You know, not everyone in the family is the same in terms of gender, perhaps sexual orientation, educational experience, and so forth. So those are all, you know, dimensions of diversity. So when I talk about this, I'm saying that diversity is, of course, inclusive of ethnicity, race, and gender, but a lot more as well. The second premise, however, is that when we use the word diversity or multicultural, it continues to be code for people of color. And therefore, people begin to make attributions. So if I'm talking about diversity, people will perhaps immediately think I'm talking about people of color only. You know, maybe some people will say, well, she's including other identities. But when I say inclusive identity is when people then get a little bit more, perhaps to recognize that I mean identity, including sexual orientation, disability, and so forth. So the terminology has meaning depending on who's using the terminology. I think the third premise is that if you are something went on the stage, okay, on the thing. If you are a person of color, you are likely viewed as the diversity quotient in your program, in your department, in your student association, or so you could be the the diversity quotient. You know, we have diversity in our organization. You know, Patricia's there, you know, Chin is there, Trin is there, and so forth. Now, if you're a white student, those who are culturally unconscious will wonder why you care about these issues. You know, so if you're a white person and you are working in the area of multicultural and diversity and white privilege, people are saying, you know, what are you doing? Why are you doing that? So I think it goes back to the first premise or second premise that when we say diversity, people think only of people of color. Okay, so they don't think white people have a stake in this. And then my last premise is that the reality remains that persons of color or underrepresented identities will have to always navigate diversity in an organization. You always have to navigate diversity. So how do we look at it from a strengths perspective? Okay. I want to start there rather than looking at it always as a problem. There's a writer, an author who was a feminist writer in women's literature. Her name is Gloria Anzaldúa, and she wrote a book about the borderlands experience that she had gone through as a Mexican-American woman who lived on the border between Texas and Mexico, who was a writer, who was a lesbian, who had particular viewpoints that were not, how would I say, that they were not consistent with how her family necessarily thought. But she used this metaphor of the borderlands as a way to capture her lived experience. Hello, I can see our other guest here. Hi. And so,
sorry, that was my internet connection.
Well, no, glad to have you. No, let me just put myself aside for a minute. Tell us who you are and where you are. Introduce yourself.
Oh.
Nadia?
One more time, I'm sorry, my internet connection.
Oh, can you?
Yes, my name is, yes. Yes. My name is Nadia Adams. I am a fifth-year counseling doctoral student at Marquette University in Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
Wonderful. Welcome. Welcome.
I don't know if everybody can hear me. My internet connection is a bit spotty.
We got that. I got that. Yeah, that went through. So you study with,
Okay.
Good. Yeah, I know some of your faculty there in counseling, in the counseling program.
Yes.
Okay. So yeah.
Yes, my advisor is Dr. Burkhardt, Dr. Alan Burkhardt.
Oh, Alan, okay. And there are a couple other people there I think I know too. So good. Well, what I was saying is that most of us have what we call this borderlands experience of kind of navigating in multiple worlds because of our identity and the fact that we are typically in the underrepresented identity in these worlds. And with that, I would say that means we are all bicultural. And some of us may be bilingual, but as a result of having to navigate that way, we are bicultural. And so you can think about that, and that there is some comfort and discomfort when you are navigating the borderlands. You know, you feel connected here and you don't feel as connected there, but you still have to be part of that world. So I always say that first generation students, students from poverty, regardless of their ethnicity or race, LGBT and transgender students, people with immigrant heritage, they all walk the borderlands. And so I think of it though still as an advantage that we can think about these as strengths we gain because we're part of 2 or 3 different worlds because of our heritage or our identity. So that's one thing, is to consider that metaphor. The other affirmative thought I had is that if you read Dr. Martin Luther King's speech, I Have a Dream, in I Have a Dream, he talks about all the possibilities that could happen in terms of people coming together and people prospering. So he had a vision in spite of all the challenges that we were confronting in 1963. Okay, because the Civil Rights Act wasn't passed till 64, and he was always under threat, but he still continued to have his dream. And I just say that his speech is, for all of us, can be a source of inspiration, of dreaming, and for all of us, we have dreams, and we want to continue to own those dreams and talk about them and write about them. Okay, so we can call them goals, but I think they're also dreams. And then the third thing I wanted to say in terms of how to consider navigating diversity as a strength is that if you were today to kind of do a spreadsheet, if you would, of your assets and your strengths, and over here, which you consider to be your liabilities or shortcomings, you would be able to see that you have a lot of strengths, a lot of achievements, a lot of barriers you transcended to get to where you are today on February 17th at Marquette or at Indiana. And that is a very important process to own. So every now and again, when things feel like they're a little bit slippery and you're not feeling so affirmed, kind of just affirm yourself with that activity of your assets and your strengths. Now, we also have to manage the negative. So this is my third talking point. And we know, and I know, that universities and other places, practicum sites, internship sites, they're full of interpersonal dynamics. There's always interpersonal dynamics. And if you are different in some way, or if you're a newcomer, or you are the visible ethnic racial group member, what Dr. Janet Helms calls a VERG person, V-E-R-G, visible ethnic racial group member, then in fact, you will stand out. You will stand out, okay? Because the majority of our classes, our universities are white. We're talking about predominantly white institutions. Marquette is a good example. So in those cases, people will probably be perpetuating microaggressions whether they know it or not. I mean, there's so much unconscious bias, and people will say things or do things that create a negative climate for you. As I say, sometimes it's not intentional, but the impact is still there. Okay, so unconscious bias leads people to say things. So I had a class with a student who's Filipino American. He was born here. His mom is Filipino, and his last name is an American name, you could say Smith. So students got into a group activity with him, and they were sharing about their backgrounds, and then they reported out and they said, we just thought he was a white American because of the way he looked. We didn't know he had Filipino heritage. So when people said that, though, it's a little bit of a slight. It's the way they said it. We thought he was just a white American, which was like, that's all there is to it, you know. But people will say things like that, or they'll say something like, oh, well, you're Mexican American, why don't you speak Spanish? Because that's the natural assumption. Or you don't look Mexican American. Or if they perceive you're, again, another visible ethnic racial group member, they'll say, gosh, you're so articulate. So all of those are are negative statements. I mean, they could be taken negatively. Someone doesn't mean any harm, but there's something about it that says they're questioning you. They're questioning your abilities, or they're questioning how you got there. You are so articulate, how did you get here, kind of thing. So these are some of the negatives that occur in classrooms with your peers. And these are realities in all the places that you're going to find yourself. Sadly, they don't go away. Okay, they don't go away. Maybe people, after they get to know you, won't make such blatant comments. But when you encounter a new group, sometimes those things will be articulated. So what is my advice when you are encountering negatives, or what you perceive to be as negative comments or behaviors? The first thing I always say is consider the source. Who's saying it? Is this a person who's in authority? Is this a person who you don't have to spend time with? Is this person someone you respect? So all of those things are helpful to me. When I used to do psychotherapy with women clients, I did a lot of work with women who were professionals, and they would have some very they would be having low self-esteem because someone in the workplace would ridicule them because they felt like they weren't working up to par, even though they were going beyond most of the men. So we would talk about, consider the source. Who is really giving you this feedback? Is this someone whose opinion matters? Is this someone who's going to be a factor in your promotion? So we would kind of unpack that onion of consider the source. Now, even if it's a professor who says something, you have to think about, is this a professor who is culturally aware? Is this a professor who is singling me out with this, or is this a professor who's always joking with all the students and saying insensitive things? So you have to kind of look at it. Is it about me, or is he just a jerk and he says things all the time to other students? So consider the source. The second thing is you don't always have to say something when you hear a comment. You don't always have to have a retort. Maybe it's like, I can't waste my time. Let's just keep on moving. So you don't always have to say something. If it does happen, number 3, if it does happen in a classroom and you're singled out, or someone else is singled out in a way that what you are hearing is a microaggression or a climate issue, write it down. Write it down and just kind of catalog it. Because I'm saying this to you oftentimes, and I'll just digress for a minute. When it comes to sexual harassment, we always tell women, document what occurred, because then you can always go back to it. So if something happens in a classroom more than once, you've got it documented. And then you're not saying, I think it happened, at the beginning of the semester, but you have it documented. So that's the third thing I would say. And then the fourth thing is take a few deep breaths. If you're feeling like, you're getting rattled and your chest is heaving and you're kind of feeling your nerves are kind of acting up, just take a few deep breaths. And then the fifth thing is that if this person is saying something that I guess includes you or refers to people who you care about, remember that person's words do not define you. Those person's words do not define you. You're more than a few blips that come out of someone's mouth. So I'm being a little simplistic, but I guess what I'm saying is that sometimes people will say things and we take offense and should take offense because they're not caring words. We just have to also say, in a whole scheme of things, do I want to waste my time on this? How much time do I want to give to this? Because if we start to engage with every microaggression we hear or experience, it could be a very long day. It could be a very long semester. So those are the things I want to also caution. So that's part of managing the negative. I also know that there are other settings where you might feel uncomfortable or some negative vibes, and that's when you go to a conference. Most conferences, whether they're APA or a state conference or something like that, one of those conferences, they're still predominantly white conferences. The membership of APA and of a state association is still predominantly white. And sometimes when you walk into a conference presentation or let's say a reception, have you all gone to APA? Have you both gone to APA?
Yes.
Yes. You can feel like you're standing out in the midst of all these people. And that can also, not only are you standing out among a lot of people who are white, but they're often older than you. They're often like your professors. So you can feel uncomfortable and wonder, do I have anything to say to them? Or, should I just disappear? Should I make myself invisible? So in those cases, what I would say is that people may be busy talking among themselves, but one of the pieces of advice is that since you're there for a reason, you're there to network, you're there to meet other people. My advice would be first to walk up to someone who's there alone, who's kind of standing there alone or who's sitting there alone, and introduce yourself. So that's how we begin to do some networking and have a couple of prepared questions. I'm so-and-so, and that so-and-so will say, I'm so-and-so. And then you could say, well, this is my first APA conference. How about you? Okay. Or you can make another question that's a little bit more open-ended. If you can, what brings you to APA? And, you can have a conversation that way. So you probably would have something in common with this person because you're both at this APA conference. If they're a student, you probably have some dimensions of identity to share with that person. So it's, likely that you'll have something. And then if there is a professor there who is standing alone or an older person who looks like a professor, you could also approach them and say, I'm so-and-so and I'm here to meet professors and other students, and so very casual, and professors generally are kind. I have taken students to conferences, and other students have reported that professors, if a student approaches me, I always talk to them, because I know what it's like to go there and feel like, do I belong here kind of thing. So I would say professors are always willing to engage with you in a conversation. And probably the third piece of advice is if you are going to a conference, kind of plan ahead. Maybe there is someone from your program who's going. Maybe there's someone. Now we know that there are two of you here who've been to APA. Maybe you could see yourselves at the next APA meeting. So you kind of begin to have that little network of 2 or 3 people and say, let's connect in San Francisco or for the National Multicultural Summit. I'm not sure when the next one is, but let's make sure we see each other there. So that really leads to some very powerful engagements. So those are my 3 pieces of advice. So let me see, we have a few more minutes. Yeah. Now, the next topic I'm going to take up is called feedback. Now, as graduate students, you are always getting feedback. You're getting feedback for what you write, for your class presentations. If you're working on a publication, you get feedback on that. So there are different reasons you get feedback. And it can be very valuable. It generally is very valuable as long as we allow the feedback to come in. If we're defensive about feedback, or we know we worked hard on the paper or on the presentation and we still got feedback, it doesn't mean that it's terrible that you get feedback. It's all part of professional development. So I remember my professor for my doctoral work would always use a red pen, and he would write everything up in red, and it looked awful. But that was his way of calling attention to what I needed to rephrase or do something with. So it just was, okay, red, it's alarm. So he got our attention. He got my attention, certainly, with red. The other thing in terms of feedback is, if you do not understand written feedback, if your professors are writing stuff and you can't read it, ask them to clarify it, because I know it's happened sometimes that I think my writing is fine, and then a student will say to me, I can't understand what you wrote here. Ask for feedback, ask for clarification, no harm there. So just don't assume that the professor doesn't like you and is kind of being sloppy, just go ahead and ask. Sometimes in class, when you're presenting, feedback, especially if it's from a professor, can come across as demeaning or critical. That's how you take it. And the tone of voice will also be part of that. If that's how it feels to you, ask for clarification. You might say something, can you please tell me what you mean? I mean, that buys you some time. Can you please tell me what you mean? Can you please tell me what you are asking? Would you like me to restate that or something? So kind of just come back with some questions rather than saying, oh, but I thought I said it perfectly clear, so you may have, but you want to make sure you pause and ask the question. Now, if a peer makes a comment you consider insulting, don't laugh it off. Don't laugh it off. You might just say, oh, what did you mean by that? You don't have to get in their face. Depends on who the person is, right? But you can also stop and say, so what did you mean by that? Or why are you saying that? To get them to perhaps pause and reflect, and they'll say, oh, I didn't mean anything. It was just a joke. So again, depending on your relationship, depending on the source, you could just walk away, or you could pursue the conversation and say, that really, I found that offensive, or, I'm not sure why you said that. And you have to, again, gauge how much you want to frustrate yourself, how much emotions you want to put into this. All right? Nothing's perfect. So welcome, Erika. I know you're on mute.
Yes, thank you. I am in the Santa Barbara area. I'm from Fielding Graduate University, so I got the times a little bit, I think, confused with the translation of times.
Yes, you're an hour after me.
Exactly. So here I am thinking I'm early, and I'm like, oh, okay, I'm late.
Well, welcome, Erika.
Thank you.
We're just going through my talking points. Now, the last topic I want to talk about has to do with emotions. And since we are on the topic of navigating diversity in predominantly white institutions, there are always emotions that will occur for us. Okay, so we're going to sometimes have cognitive dissonance and say, what did that person mean by that? But if there's cognitive dissonance, there's usually some emotional dissonance too. So what are some of the emotions, or what do I want to say here? Well, when it comes to navigating diversity in an institution where we are underrepresented, it always means we're navigating our emotions too. Because we, again, may feel out of place. We may feel that people are not connecting to us the way it would benefit us. There's always some emotions to navigate. The second thing, though, is trust your emotions. Trust your emotions. Microaggressions don't make us feel good. You know, even if somebody tells you, oh, it was a joke, or I didn't mean it, or whatever they say, but still trust your emotions that it was upsetting. It felt negative to you. The third thing is that emotions are clues. And you have to say to yourself, okay, why am I feeling this little pain here in my chest? Or, you know, emotions are clues that it affected you. Whatever was said or whatever was done affected you. The fourth thing is that there will typically be discomfort or unease when you're the only person in the room or the classroom or the agency and so forth that looks like you. If you're the only person that looks like you, is you in that setting, you are going to feel some discomfort. I just think it's a very natural thing to feel. So, you know, just check it out for yourself. So you can, again, as I said, ask what the emotion is about. Am I feeling nervous because I'm the only person who looks like me here? Am I feeling fearful? So am I all of a sudden getting heat palpitations, you know? And is that because I'm here as the only one? So all of those are telling to us. Defense mechanisms. Sometimes we can get into the use of defense mechanisms, which is causing us to react then, or to blame. So here I would say, notice if you are beginning to engage in the use of defense mechanisms, because that can also take us down a slippery slope. You know, you always want to stay centered as much as we can when we're navigating diversity. So this brings to mind my sort of last, I guess, little academic piece is I remind us to take into account emotional intelligence. And in our field of counseling and psychology, we've learned a lot of skills. And some of those skills are from the emotional intelligence area, emotional intelligence literature. So the 4 steps in emotional intelligence are self-awareness, which we've been talking about quite a bit, knowing what I'm thinking, knowing what I'm feeling as I'm navigating in this predominantly white institution. The second step in emotional intelligence is self-management, how we manage those emotions, and how we appropriate a response at the right time, okay? The third step is social awareness. Look at where you are, okay? So when these things are occurring, are you in a setting where, again, you are in relationship to other students, other faculty, or again, what is going on in that setting? So be socially aware if it's an academic setting versus a social setting versus a conference. Pay attention to that social context and yourself. And then the fourth step in emotional intelligence is relationship management. So how we manage the relationships with even with people that we feel are not the most respectful people. We want to, I mean, it's easier to say sometimes, we want to take the high road, we kind of don't have to give them a lot of attention, but we want to make sure we're saving our energy for the important relationships. So we can't manage all relationships, but there are ones that we want to invest in. And so that's part of relationship management. So my final thoughts are these. Navigating diversity is a lifelong process. Like I said that at the very beginning. And being in graduate school is a great place to practice navigating diversity. Always have a colleague or a friend to talk over your experiences. You want, you know, colleagues or friends are, maybe they're other students, okay, who would understand what you're saying. Sometimes a family member doesn't. Sometimes a partner doesn't. And I'm looking at 3 women here, and sometimes if you're in a heterosexual partnership, men like to solve the problem for you, and you know, you want to just talk about it. So that's the other thing to keep in mind. Men sometimes are not, you know, they mean well, but they may not be the ones who can hear you out. So people who are perhaps familiar with what your goals are, what you're doing, and the challenges. And as you sometimes encounter some of these navigating diversity situations, engage in some of your best communication skills in challenging situations. You've all been taught communication skills in your program of study. Use them. Use them. You know, that's why I say clarifying questions, for rephrasing or phrasing what somebody said, kind of reflecting back to them almost what they said. So use your best counseling skills when you are in these kind of dilemmas. And finally, what I said earlier is keep your eye on the prize. Remember why you're there. Remember why you're in graduate school. You're there to accomplish a very important milestone in your life. And so while you're doing this, appreciate yourself. Okay, appreciate yourself, because you got to where you are, so you've done a lot to get there. So appreciate that about yourself, and don't let someone pull you off your plan. So those are my comments for today. So thank you for the time, and I'll turn it back to Wade.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Arredondo, for all of the different areas that you talked about. And I feel like personally, I very much appreciate the suggestions that you make, because in those conversations, sometimes we talk a lot about the problems, but not so much about what we can do. So I think, especially coming from a professor who is empathizing with the experience of students, I feel very empowered by what you said and what you shared. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anyone else want to comment?
Hi, yeah, it's Erika. I want to say thank you for the suggestions that I've heard towards the tail end. And I also wanted to say that for me, my experience is kind of what you said, where I may be the only person either in a practicum or on student government that looks like me.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, I think what was helpful this year, I wrote a mission statement. I like what you said about keeping your eye on the prize. So I wrote a mission statement, but just for this year. And every year I'm going to, turn it and tweak it. You said diversity and all, and learning about diversity is a lifelong thing.
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to stress that is an excellent point. It's something that we don't really think about. It's not set. So I really appreciate what you said, but I think the mission statement really helped me when I wrote it down to kind of keep exactly what you were mentioning with the focus. Mm-hmm. So that I can, even though we go through our situations, we'll definitely have that, and I even wrote it down, I have it on a sticky note on my computer. I have it on a sticky note in different places. Good. So that when things get a little rough in terms of how I feel about me being different from everybody else, I kind of just keep that in my mind. So that's helpful.
Great.
Yeah, I would just also like to say this really resonated with me because I just completed internship interviews and kind of hearing the reminder that navigating diversity is ongoing. I feel like I had got comfortable in my current school, in my current practicum setting. So I kind of felt like I had a good idea of how to manage things at my practicum site or at school, and then being thrust into all of these new settings, you know, during internship interviews and forgetting, oh, you know, this is going to be an ongoing thing and I'm going to have to reassess. And everybody has a very different level or interest in incorporating diversity. And just, it was kind of nice to hear that, yes, this is going to be very much so an ongoing, you know, thing that I will have to experience in a range of different settings. It doesn't end per se. It was also nice to hear, you know, the other kind of empowering words of, you know, you have gotten this far, you have the tools to deal with it, and just some practical steps and reminders of take a deep breath, you know, think about the context you're in, think about who you're talking in. And again, for me, that's one of those things, kind of really choosing where to invest my energy and, you know, preserve relationships versus where I really need to preserve my energy. So just kind of hearing all of those things again was very helpful. So thank you.
Welcome. You're welcome. Well, what I told Ray is that I would send her the my notes, and she could post them, she could share them, and they're here written out. So I think it's easy to pass them on. Do you want to talk about next week now?
Yes, sure. So we will have our second session with Dr. Arredondo next Saturday at the same time. So that is 1 p.m. MST. So depending where you are, you may want to translate the time and kind of figure out when it is at your time. So the setup of our program is we're going to have the first session more about presentation, which is like what Dr. Arredondo did today. She primarily talked about the things that she wanted to share. And next week is our follow-up session, which will be a bit more informal. And you're welcome to follow up with the points that she mentioned today. Maybe you can share your own experiences and bring up specific questions for discussion. So our intention is to build more of a bond between all of our students and the mentor that is speaking. Yeah.
Well, I hope everyone will come back next week. I'll be here.
Yeah, I hope so too. And
yeah.